How and why HMCS Haida was saved begins with her sister ship, HMCS Athabaskan, and what happened to her during the Second World War. Athabaskan and Haida were in company one fateful night, April 28-29, 1944. They had engaged with two German Elbing-class destroyers about 6 miles off the Breton coast in northwestern France. Athabaskan was sunk by enemy fire. This event changed my young life forever. 128 of Athabaskan's crew were lost. Among them was my father. I was 13 when my dad was killed. I worshipped him. He was a loving father. His loss was devastating to our family. 44 Athabaskan crew members were rescued by HMCS Haida under the command of Harry de Wolf. A further 83 survivors were taken prisoner by the Germans. What Haida's CO, Harry de Wolf, and his crew did that night was extremely brave. My son Mark and I have been to visit the graves of unknown Athabaskans at Plouscat in Brittany. The townspeople there keep those graves neat and tidy to this very day. The wreck of Athabaskan lies 6 miles off the Breton coast in 285 feet of very dangerous water. In 2003, my son Mark was one of 5 to dive on it, and the first Canadian to do so. The images they took were very captivating. It was quite a feeling waiting for my son to return to the surface from my father's war grave. The RCN had provided us with a commemorative plaque. Mark placed it on the Athabaskan's keel on the port side to commemorate all those souls killed in action. Anyhow, that's why I got involved in saving the Haida. As for the how I got involved in helping save the Haida from the breakers, it goes back to the RCN's Great Lakes deployment in 1963. Haida was sent on a farewell tour. By then, I was military editor of the old Toronto Telegram newspaper and a naval reserve officer at HMCS York. I was lucky enough to get on board Haida for a day sail out of Toronto. On board, I met Trans-Canada Airlines pilot Neil Bruce, lawyer and former naval officer Norm Simpson, Alan Howard, who was the curator of Toronto's Maritime Museum, and public relations expert Dave Kidd. We got talking about what a tragedy it would be for this famous, wonderful ship to be scrapped and turned into razor blades. She deserved better, and so did Canada. We agreed to explore the possibilities. I knew Defense Minister Paul Haida quite well because of my military writing, so I went directly to him and asked if we might get hold of the ship. Paul Haida said she would be disposed of through Crown assets, but I should leave it with him. Neil Bruce, who was really the spokesman behind this attempt to save Haida, also made a few trips to Ottawa to talk to Mr. Haida. Remember, as scrap, Haida was probably worth $500,000, and that's nearly $5 million in today's dollars. A lot of money in 1963, far beyond what we might raise. In due time, Paul Haida worked out something which took Crown assets out of the picture. We could get the ship for $20,000 to be paid over 10 years, no interest, and the first payment deferred a year. That's about $175,000 in today's money. Additional conditions included that we would have to pick up Haida in Sorel, Quebec from the Navy, and also pledge to keep her in good condition so the government could have her back if needed for national defense. That was the wrinkle which allowed us to bypass Crown assets. We were in business. Norm Spencer did all the legal work pro bono in setting up Haida Incorporated, and we all put our homes up at the bank to finance towing her from Sorrel to Toronto, $6,000 plus $2,500 for insurance, about $65,000 in today's money. I remember calling my wife Jane and telling her I'd just put our house up as collateral at the bank, but we owned 1/5 of the destroyer. There was dead silence for a few heartbeats, and then she said, "Whoopee." To which I replied, "Yes, honey, but Ariel Nassus, the Greek shipping tycoon, only owns a frigate." Well, because we were now a registered charity, we could start raising funds. Dave Kidd went to work on that. HMCS York agreed to special duty for a crew of 18 reservists to go to Sorrel and pick up Haida from the Navy in mid-August 1964. Meanwhile, the partners worked their magic for us to get permission to berth the ship at the foot of York Street in Toronto Harbor. Our reserve crew went to Montreal by train, turning the sleeper car into something that looked like a Second World War troop train draft. We even convinced the porter that our 120-volt generator was hand baggage. We were met in Montreal by a Navy bus, which drove us to Sorrel, where Haida was waiting. The Navy had crammed her with artifacts from the Second World War: hammocks, hat boxes, dummy ammunition, and even a cutaway model of a torpedo. All things we could use in setting up displays for the public. As the only member of Haida Incorporated to make the trip to Sorrel, I signed for the ship, and she was ours. Lieutenant Commander Jack McCrory was our electrical officer. We tied down the generator behind B turret, Jack built the ship's emergency wiring system, and we had power. Here's a picture of our crew. That's me, front far left, then Jack McCrory, followed by Bill Wilson, who was then our executive officer at HMCS York, and now the CEO of Haida, and far right, Bob Ellis. I was the quarterdeck officer, and Bob Ellis was the forecastle officer. We set up half a dozen Coleman stoves in the wardroom flats, and Petty Officer Bill Lloyd became the cook, and an extremely good one. We had thoughtfully brought along some rum, so we could have a regular up spirits for everyone in the wardroom. And away we went. Well, it was heavy work, handling the blinds as we locked through the seaway, and we saw to it that Haida did not even scratch paint going through the lock. We all handled blinds. Jack McCrory had brought along a set of two-way radios, and we had given 2 to the tugmaster. In true service fashion, Bill Wilson would call up the tugs with, "Tug McAllister, this is Warship Haida, come in McAllister." These 2 French-Canadian tug skippers put up with us for about half an hour, and then they turned off their radios. Once through the seaway locks, one of the tugs left us. I remember waking up one morning to discover that we were anchored in the St. Lawrence in deep fog. We hadn't a clue where we were. Picture Bill Wilson leaning over the rail with an SO road map as mystified pleasure boats emerged from the fog, amazed at a Tarble-class destroyer in their river, while Bill Wilson asked, "Where are we?" Finally, the fog cleared, and we proceeded into Lake Ontario. There was a west wind creating a bit of a sea, and Haida pitched the deck as though she was eager to get to her new life. We anchored off Toronto's Western Gap just as the exhibition fireworks went off. We played with the searchlight that Jack McCrory had flashed up, and we waved at occasional curious motorboats. We also got ready to dress ship overall for the next day's official arrival. It was just a great entry the next morning, as the tug took us through the Western Gap into Toronto Harbor, and an armada of pleasure boats met us, horns and sirens sounding. A fireboat spewed huge arcs of water over multiple hoses. At the York Street jetty waiting for us were Harry DeWolf, Bob Run, and J.A. Charles, all former CEOs of Haida, plus Defense Minister Paul Hader and Toronto Mayor Phil Gibbons. Now we had to settle down to business. There were surprises in store for us, however. In early autumn 1964, HMS Britannia brought Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip to Charlottetown, PEI, to mark the centennial of the Charlottetown Conference that resulted in the creation of Canada. I was one of more than 100 news people assigned to cover the visit. I had a bit of an inside track because an acquaintance was in charge of RCMP Marine Security. When the Charlottetown part of the visit ended, Britannia, with Her Majesty and His Royal Highness, embarked, sailed on to Quebec City. I got a berth in HMCS Terra Nova, one of the escorting destroyers. Coverage in Quebec City for journalists was a real zoo, with some compensations. There was to be a reception on Britannia for some of the news people covering the visit, and I was fortunate enough to get an invitation. That was my chance to speak with former Royal Naval Officer Prince Philip. I made a beeline for him right away and explained what we were doing with the Haida, and he was very interested. Then I said, "Your Highness, it would be wonderful if you could become our patron." He reared back and he said, "You can't ask me that sort of thing. You have to go through proper channels." And then he leaned forward and he said, "And this is how you do it." I followed his advice, and a couple of months later, he was our patron, which certainly made it easier to get corporate donations for Haida Inc. In 1966, Prince Philip made a visit to Toronto. He complained that there was no visit for the Haida scheduled for him. So his handlers gave him 15 minutes. He came and he spent almost 2 hours with us. We served him rum in the wardroom and he climbed all over the ship, thoroughly enjoying himself. 3 years after that, Prince Philip was in Ottawa and I met him at a reception at Rideau Hall. As soon as he saw me, he grabbed my arm and he said, "How's the Haida?" So I updated him. 2 years later, the same thing happened. Well, it sure wasn't all that kind of glory. The first winter we had Haida in Toronto, we discovered a serious problem. A warship alongside in fresh water with no power in winter faces the danger of water in the tube hull fittings freezing, expanding, and cracking the hull. That meant we had to keep water flowing through each opening, and that meant running the pumps 24/7 in a sometimes scary attempt to keep that ship afloat. At one time, we had 5 feet of water in the engine room. We 5 Haida Inc. members were often called in the middle of these winter nights to deal with problems. Come spring, Norm Simpson got hold of his friend Scott Meisner, who owned Colonial Shipping Lines and the Port Willard dry dock. Meisner said that he would pull Haida to Port Willard, dry dock her, and weld shut all the openings and then tow her back for $20,000. What a gift. Commercially, something like that would have cost at least 5 times that amount, nearly $900,000 in today's dollars. By 1970, things had become tight for us financially, and Haida needed some work. I was stationed in Ottawa by then, and somewhat out of the loop. We discussed things, and Norm Simpson said he thought the Ontario government might help. After all, Premier John Robarts was a former naval officer. Yes, the Ontario government was interested, and they agreed to take control of Haida, assisted by Friends of Haida and the volunteers from HMCS York. Haida would become the jewel of Ontario Place. I remember getting a release from the bank on the lien of our house when Ontario government took control of Haida. Haida was a major attraction at Ontario Place for more than 3 decades, until Heritage Minister responsible for Parks Canada, Sheila Copps, took her to Hamilton, where Haida is berthed today at HMCS Tower. When Haida was proclaimed the ceremonial flagship of the RCN, I wrote to Prince Philip at Buckingham Palace to tell him, and received a lovely letter back 2 weeks later, saying that our efforts had been vindicated. Parks Canada wanted to do something big and meaningful, and organized a 3-day event. They made special blank rounds filled with black powder for the 4-inch guns. With 8 turrets trained to starboard toward New York State, they fired a salvo. It was quite loud. There were sailors from the 3 area Naval Reserve divisions on parade, including HMCS York. The ship seemed to raise steam again, smoke billowing out of the main funnel. And the Corvette aircraft did a fly past. It was simply magical, particularly when the sirens went off. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Best of all, the park staff invited 2 hereditary chiefs of the seagoing Haida Nation from the West Coast to right a historical wrong. No one of the Haida Nation had ever had direct contact with their namesake ship in her 75 years of existence. 2 hereditary chiefs spoke with pride and had a powerful message.
In the course of history, there's always these conflicts that occur, and people want to do this and that and take possession of this and that. And there is always some conflict somewhere. And the Haida was built to engage in that sort of a conflict. And we've been, I guess it follows the tradition of the Haida Nation, where we were in many, many conflicts over the years. And at the end of the time, we learned very quickly that there are no winners in these conflicts. There are no winners in a war. So we developed a different approach. We tried to compromise and get along with people and build relationships and do things together that are more productive than trying to do things on our own. Because it just doesn't work that way.
It was very moving. It was a special moment when Vice Admiral Lloyd spontaneously ordered the hoisting of the Haida Nation flag to the foremast portside yardarm of Haida. There wasn't a dry eye in the house. The Haida Nation flag still flies today as a symbol of that respect. In the evening, there was a beautiful commemorative ceremony to honor those lost during the Battle of the Atlantic. As the names of those lost at sea scrolled up onto Haida's hull, I saw that of my own father appear. My kids and I wept as it brought everything back full circle, 75 years on. As a country, we made the right decision to save this ship. The Parks Canada staff and the Friends of Haida are just as passionate about telling her story as I am. She's in great hands now, and that makes me happy. I want to thank the Royal Canadian Navy for this opportunity to tell my story about HMCS Haida. Thank you, RCN.